Hey guys, we're looking at Exploring World History, lesson number 21, where Israel becomes a nation. And this time frame is going to be the second half of the second millennium. And for those of you who aren't sure what that means, it's basically the 1500 to 1000 BC time period, okay? So before we get into Israel and them becoming a nation, let's talk about a little what else is going on in the world, okay? You have the Shang dynasty in China that's flourishing. In India, you have the Hindu religion that's starting to grow. The Phoenician ships are trading in the Mediterranean Sea and on the Atlantic Ocean. In Greece, the city of Mycenae is being built. And in Central America, you have the Mayans as a flourishing civilization. All this is happening around the same time that the Israels are on the southern coast of the Mediterranean, and they're forming the new nation of Israel. And so let's go back and look at kind of where they came from, okay? The affliction and deliverance of Israel. It starts with coming to Egypt, right? Joseph was the vizier of Egypt. He remember, got basically sold into slavery by his brothers, and eventually he becomes the vizier of Egypt. Jacob and his family wind up moving to Egypt and are saved from the famine that was going on and are blessed by Pharaoh and are allowed to live there. They're given the land of Goshen where they prosper, okay, under that Pharaoh. Eventually, time passes and things change, and there's a new Pharaoh that comes into place. And this Pharaoh does not remember Joseph and the agreement that the past Pharaohs had with the Israelites at all. And he's starting to fear the number of the Israelites. They're growing, like I said, and they are becoming a large group of people, and that Pharaoh's getting a little worried about them. So he starts to do things to try to control them, and eventually winds up enslaving them. They're forced into labor. They're required to make bricks for different building projects, and eventually become completely oppressed. This Pharaoh starts to the numbers are still growing. He tries to ethnically cleanse the Israelites with infanticide. He's killing all the male children under 2 years old. And he's just, if you're born a male, you're supposed to die. The girls could live and mix with others of the different races, and that would be fine because that would also eventually kill the Israelite race. It's during this time where the male children are being killed that a man that we know as Moses is born. And his mother takes him and places him in a basket by the Nile River, and his sister's sitting there watching him. And eventually, the Pharaoh's daughter goes down to the river, and she finds the baby, and she names him Moses. And she raises him as her own son in the Pharaoh's house and in the ways of the Pharaoh and the royalty. Eventually, as Moses grows old and he realizes he is a Hebrew man and he's not sure what to do, he sees an Egyptian man beating a Hebrew man, and he steps in. And eventually, he kills this man on behalf of the Hebrew man. And so then the Pharaoh finds out and tries to kill Moses. And Moses escapes into Midian. And once he gets to Midian, taking a lot of things, making it very quick, but he marries Zipporah, who was the daughter of Jethro. And at this point, he's just tending sheep. And he's happy to be living there and living his life with his wife and a new home, and everything's good. Then one day, God calls him from the burning bush. And he says, God says to Moses, I need you to go to Egypt and tell them to let my people go, right? The infamous phrase of let my people go. Well, Moses debates with God some, eventually goes to Pharaoh and tells him to let my people go. And after a series of plagues, eventually Pharaoh decides to let them go. And as the Israelites are leaving, they're coming to the Red Sea, and they think they're going to be trapped. And at this point, Pharaoh has decided he wasn't going to let them go, and so he's coming back to take them back. And God miraculously parts the Red Sea, and the Israelites are allowed to cross on dry land. And the Pharaoh's army tries to follow them and gets swallowed up by the Red Sea. After this point, God makes a covenant with Israel and decides to break it down with Moses through them. And he says that he will be their God and they will be their people. But the Israelites had to do a couple of things. First, they had to set themselves apart from the world. They also had to dedicate themselves to worshiping and serving only the one true God. God gave them the laws to obey, the 10 Commandments through Moses, and the people agreed to the covenant. Yet they continued to struggle with their faith and with obeying God. And they're supposed to be reaching this promised land, right? And so Moses is leading them to the promised land, and he gets them to the border of the promised land, and he sends spies into the land to try to figure out what they need to do and what the land is good or not. And 12 spies go out, they all come back, and 10 of them give a bad report and basically says, we don't trust that God can do this for us. The people are, there's giants in the land. It's going to be too challenging. And as a result, their punishment for not believing in God is that they have to wander the desert for another 40 years. And Moses is not going to be allowed to enter. Eventually, a man named Joshua becomes the leader of the Israelites, and he leads the Israelites across the Jordan River into the Promised Land. And they fight till they control all of the land, and they divide the land up among the tribes of Israel. Joshua, it goes through a period of judges where, like I said, the Israelites are struggling to obey. They want to obey, then they disobey, and they kind of go back and forth. And there's a period of judges and where they're trying to truly judging the Israelites for what they're doing, trying to get them to bring back to God. And Joshua challenges the Israelites to serve God and put away the idols, and eventually says, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. But the Israelites, they couldn't obey, and they forsook the Lord, and they began to worship the gods of the people around them. The Baal, the chief Canaanite god, or Ashtoreth, the goddess, and this became a cycle of events. This is through the judges, God turns them over to their enemies because they're worshiping these other gods. They eventually, would become enslaved or oppressed, and the people would cry out to God for help, and then God would give them a judge to deliver them and kind of remove them from their enemy, and peace would be restored, and then they'd go through this cycle again. And the judges is, the definition basically in this point is someone who brought the judgment of God against Israel's enemies in battle. And then there were several different judges that we'll see in the Bible and different things. Ultimately, though, during this building of the Israeli nation, we come with a couple things that we need to learn. The twofold legacy to the world. First is the knowledge of what it means to live for the one true God. And the second is what it means when an individual or a nation does not live in that way and for the one true God. And there's influence that occurred because of these. Law that God gave Moses has had a significant impact on all of Western legal practices. The writings of the Hebrews have had an influence on our thoughts and on our literature and different processes throughout this time since then. It also influenced us by showing that God's working with Israel is an important building block and is providing a savior for the whole world. Thank you.